I'm Olivia Wilson, 28, and I never thought my mother's silence would hurt more than any insult. Why don't you just disappear? My stepsister Vanessa screamed across our family dinner table, her face flushed with anger. The words stung, but it was my mom's reaction that shattered me. She crossed her arms and smirked, like she'd been waiting for someone to say it. After years of being second best, that moment clarified everything. So I left. Before I share how that decision changed my life, let me know where you're watching from in the comments, and subscribe if you've ever had to walk away from someone you loved for your own peace. My childhood before Vanessa entered our lives was what most would call normal, even happy at times. Mom, Diane, now 48, used to be my biggest cheerleader. I remember her attending every school play, helping with science projects, late into the night, and the way she'd brush my hair before bed, telling me stories about when she was a little girl. We weren't perfect, but there was love there, a foundation I thought was unshakable. Everything changed when I was 13 and my parents' marriage collapsed. Dad had been distant for months, working late, missing dinners, and then one night, he sat me down and explained he wouldn't be living with us anymore. The divorce was messy. I'd overhear Mom crying on the phone at night, documents spread across the kitchen table, and tension that made our once warm home feel like a battleground. I was still processing the new reality of splitting weekends between two households when Mom introduced Robert just 18 months later. He seemed nice enough, quiet, successful, with kind eyes that crinkled at the corners when he smiled. But he came with baggage in the form of his 20-year-old daughter, Vanessa, who had just dropped out of her second college program and needed a place to stay. I was 15, awkward, and still grieving my parents' marriage, but I tried. I helped Vanessa move her things into our guest room, offered to show her around town, even gave her my favorite coffee shop recommendations. The first warning signs were subtle: Mom suddenly remembering Vanessa was allergic to shellfish and removing my birthday seafood dinner from the menu, or interrupting my stories at dinner to ask Vanessa about her day. I rationalized it all. Mom was just trying to make Vanessa feel welcome, to build bridges in our new blended family. Dad had relocated for work to Colorado, so his visits became rare, holiday phone calls, and the occasional weekend trip that always felt too short. His absence left me without an ally as the dynamic at home shifted beneath my feet. Mom started referring to Vanessa as our daughter within months, while I increasingly became my daughter, a subtle linguistic distinction that spoke volumes. One night, about 6 months after they moved in, I found Mom in Vanessa's room, sitting on her bed and looking through old photo albums, laughing and sharing stories I'd never heard. When I stood in the doorway, neither of them invited me to join. That night, I stared at my ceiling, understanding something fundamental had changed, though I couldn't yet name the feeling of being replaced. College acceptance letters should have been a time of celebration, but they became another battlefield in our home. I'd been accepted to several universities, including my dream school with a partial scholarship. When I showed Mom the financial aid package, explaining I'd still need help with tuition, her response floored me. "We just can't swing that right now, honey. Maybe consider community college first." 2 weeks later, she announced they would be fully funding Vanessa's third attempt at college, this time at an expensive private art school. The inequality was so blatant I couldn't ignore it anymore. I took out student loans, worked 20 hours a week at a campus coffee shop, and another 15 hours as a design lab assistant. Meanwhile, Vanessa got a brand new MacBook Pro because art students need the best tools. My academic achievements, making Dean's List despite my work schedule, winning a design competition that got published in a national magazine, received obligatory acknowledgement from Mom, usually a quick, "That's nice, honey," before changing the subject. But when Vanessa managed to actually pass all her classes one semester, Mom took the entire family out to celebrate at an upscale restaurant I couldn't afford on my own. Robert seemed uncomfortable with the disparities sometimes. I'd catch him watching me with a furrowed brow when Mom would gush over Vanessa's mediocre artwork while my design projects sat unmentioned. Once, he secretly slipped me $300 after overhearing me on the phone with my bank about an overdraft fee. "Your mom doesn't need to know," he whispered. But his complicity in silence was its own form of betrayal. Family gatherings became increasingly painful. At Thanksgiving during my junior year, Mom placed me at the kids' table with my younger cousins while Vanessa sat with the adults. When I quietly questioned this, Mom hissed, "Don't make a scene, Olivia. Vanessa doesn't know anyone here." Every time I tried to address the unfair treatment, I was met with deflection and gaslighting. "You're being too sensitive," or "You've always been jealous of any attention I give others," or the most painful, "Vanessa just needs more support than you do." My 21st birthday coincided with finals week my junior year. I didn't expect much, maybe a card or a phone call. What I got was nothing, not even a text message. When I called that evening, Mom answered distractedly, "Oh, is that today? I'm sorry, we're just in the middle of planning Vanessa's graduation party." Vanessa's graduation was still 2 months away, and she had barely squeaked by with her associate's degree. I cried myself to sleep that night, clutching my childhood teddy bear, the only witness to my growing invisibility in my own family. The pattern continued after college. Mom and Robert helping Vanessa with the down payment on her first apartment while I lived with 3 roommates in a cramped space. Mom keeping the spare key to Vanessa's place on her keychain, but forgetting to ask for one to my apartment. Vanessa's artwork hanging prominently in their living room while my design awards collected dust in my old bedroom closet. Each incident built upon the last, eroding my self-worth and teaching me a painful lesson. In my mother's eyes, I would always be second best. If not for Maya, I might have convinced myself I was the problem. We met in a graphic design class sophomore year, and she noticed things about my family dynamic that I'd normalized. "It's not right how your mom treats you," she said after witnessing an uncomfortable phone call where Mom canceled our lunch plans because Vanessa had broken up with her boyfriend and needed support. Maya's outsider perspective helped me see the toxicity I'd been swimming in. She invited me to her family holidays when I couldn't face my own, introduced me to her parents who asked about my career with genuine interest, and never made me feel like an inconvenience. Through Maya, I met James during our senior year, a psychology major who helped put academic terms to what I was experiencing: emotional neglect, favoritism, narcissistic family dynamics. Our relationship only lasted 8 months, but his insights stayed with me long after. "Your mother's treatment says nothing about your worth and everything about her limitations," he told me during one particularly difficult night after Mom had forgotten to tell me about a family vacation they'd taken with Vanessa. James encouraged me to try therapy, which I finally did after graduation when my first real job provided insurance coverage. Dr. Levine, a compassionate woman with silver-streaked hair and penetrating eyes, created a safe space where I could unravel the knot of emotions I'd been carrying. "You've been trying to earn love that should have been freely given," she observed in one session that left me sobbing for an hour straight. Despite the family chaos, my career became my salvation. I poured myself into graphic design, staying late at the office, volunteering for challenging projects, building a portfolio that spoke to my resilience and creativity. My boss, Elaine, became something of a mentor, recognizing my talent and pushing me to aim higher than I believed possible. "You have a unique eye," she'd say, reviewing my work with the attentiveness my mother never showed. When I landed my first major client independently, Elaine took me to lunch and toasted to many more successes. It was the kind of celebration I'd always craved from Mom. My circle expanded. Colleagues who became friends, Maya's extended network, neighbors in my apartment building who invited me for impromptu dinner parties. I built a chosen family of people who valued me without conditions or comparisons. They celebrated my victories, both professional and personal, and provided shoulders to cry on during inevitable setbacks. Through them, I experienced what healthy relationships felt like: reciprocal, nurturing, and free from the constant need to prove my worth. The internal conflict never fully disappeared, though. Part of me still desperately wanted Mom's approval, still hoped for the day she'd see me clearly and love me fully. I'd rehearse conversations where I finally made her understand how her favoritism had hurt me, fantasizing about tearful reconciliations and promises to do better. Then reality would intrude. Another missed birthday, another family photo posted on social media where I wasn't present, another holiday where my gifts for her sat unopened while Vanessa's were exclaimed over. Dad tried in his limited way to be supportive from a distance. Our relationship had suffered from the geographical separation, but he called regularly and sent thoughtful, if sometimes awkwardly chosen, gifts. During one visit back east, he confided, "Your mother was always intense in her attachments. Don't take it personally, kiddo." I didn't have the heart to tell him how impossible that advice was to follow. How could I not take it personally when the message had been so consistently delivered throughout my formative years? My mother preferred someone else to her own daughter. What could be more personal than that? The Christmas when I was 25 marked the first breaking point. Mom had always told me that Grandma Wilson's pearl necklace would be mine someday. "These will be for your wedding day," she'd say when I was little, letting me try on the creamy, luminous strand that had been in our family for 3 generations. That Christmas morning, I watched in disbelief as Mom presented a familiar blue velvet box to Vanessa. "These belong to Olivia's grandmother," she explained, as if I wasn't sitting 3 feet away. "But I want you to have them for your wedding next year." Vanessa's surprise engagement had been announced just weeks earlier. I sat frozen, struggling to breathe as Vanessa slipped the pearls around her neck. My grandmother's pearls, my birthright, now adorning the throat of someone who'd never even met the woman who owned them. When I finally found my voice and questioned Mom privately, her dismissal was casual, cutting. "Vanessa's actually getting married, Olivia. You're not even dating anyone seriously. The pearls should be worn, not sitting in a drawer waiting for someday." 3 months later, I developed severe abdominal pain and ended up in the emergency room with a ruptured appendix. Maya drove me to the hospital at 2 a.m. and called my mother while I was in surgery. Mom promised to come right away but never showed. I woke up groggy and in pain to find Maya still there, looking uncomfortable. "Your mom called," she said carefully. "Vanessa has a dance recital today for her adult ballet class. Your mom said, since you're stable, she'll come tomorrow instead." The betrayal of choosing an adult beginner dance recital over her daughter's surgery was a wound deeper than the one the surgeons had closed. The financial betrayal came next. Mom called asking if she could borrow $3,000, my entire emergency fund. "It's for Vanessa's car down payment," she explained. "Her old one broke down, and she needs reliable transportation for her new job." Despite my better judgment, I transferred the money, hoping this act of generosity might finally earn me the maternal love I craved. Mom promised to pay me back in 3 months. A year later, when I gently brought it up, she looked genuinely confused. "I thought that was a gift," she said. "Vanessa really needed that car." The money was never mentioned again. The betrayal of trust cut deeper when I discovered Mom had been sharing my personal struggles as gossip. At a cousin's wedding, my aunt referenced my recent job uncertainty, information I'd shared with Mom during a rare vulnerable moment. "Diane mentioned you're having trouble at work," my aunt said with performative concern. "Vanessa says you might get fired." I hadn't told Vanessa anything about my job. The realization that Mom was not only sharing my private information, but distorting it to make me look unsuccessful compared to Vanessa was devastating. Vanessa's behavior worsened as she internalized her privileged position in the family. She'd borrow my things when I visited without asking, interrupt me constantly during family conversations, and make subtle digs about my appearance or career choices that Mom never corrected. During one particularly uncomfortable dinner, Vanessa commented, "It's so brave how you wear those jeans with your body type, Olivia." Mom nodded in agreement while Robert studied his plate. The Thanksgiving incident was particularly cruel. I'd spent hours making my grandmother's special cranberry relish from a recipe I'd treasured. As I carried it to the table, Vanessa accidentally bumped my arm, sending the crystal dish crashing to the floor. As I knelt among the shards, fighting back tears over the lost tradition, I heard Mom laugh. "Well, I guess we're having canned cranberry sauce after all," she said, winking at Vanessa. "Probably tastes better anyway." Robert's discomfort with the dynamic grew more visible over time. I'd catch him watching these interactions with a furrowed brow, sometimes opening his mouth as if to intervene before thinking better of it. Once, after a particularly mean-spirited comment from Vanessa about my struggling freelance career, which was actually thriving, he pulled me aside. "You know I care about you, right, Olivia?" he said awkwardly. "I wish things were different." But wishes without action meant nothing, and his continued silence made him complicit. I tried setting boundaries, limiting visits, keeping conversations superficial, declining certain family gatherings. But these strategies were treated as further evidence of my difficult personality. "Why are you always so sensitive?" Mom would ask when I'd object to Vanessa's behavior. "She's just joking around. You need to lighten up." Each incident built upon the last, creating a mountain of evidence that I tried desperately to ignore or explain away. But deeper truth was becoming unavoidable. I was fundamentally unloved in my own family. The dinner that changed everything happened on a Tuesday in April. Mom had called insisting I come over, saying it had been too long since we'd had a family meal. I'd just landed the biggest client of my freelance career, a major tech company, that wanted me to redesign their entire brand identity. For once, I had news worth sharing, an achievement no one could diminish. I arrived at 6 carrying a bottle of champagne, rehearsing how I'd announce my news. The house smelled of Mom's pot roast. Robert greeted me with his usual awkward side hug, and for a moment, I allowed myself to hope this dinner might be different. Vanessa arrived 20 minutes late, as usual, making a theatrical entrance about terrible traffic, though we lived in the same neighborhood and I'd had no issues. Before I could even mention my news, Vanessa announced she'd been promoted to assistant manager at the boutique where she'd been working part-time. It's basically running the whole store when the manager isn't there, she explained. Though I knew the position was largely ceremonial, the boutique only had 3 employees total. Mom reacted as if Vanessa had been named CEO of a Fortune 500 company. "That's my girl," she exclaimed, jumping up to hug her. "I knew they'd recognize your leadership abilities." She insisted on opening my champagne right then to celebrate Vanessa's achievement. As they toasted, I sat silently, watching my opportunity to share my own news evaporate. Throughout dinner, the conversation revolved entirely around Vanessa's promotion, the responsibilities, the slight pay increase, which outfits she should wear to command authority. When I tried to steer the conversation toward other topics, Mom kept circling back. "But enough about that. Tell us more about the promotion, Vanessa." After nearly an hour of this, I finally interrupted. "Actually, I have some news too. I landed the Nexus Tech account today. It's a 6-figure design project." There was a brief silence before Mom said, "Oh, that's nice, honey." Then immediately turned back to Vanessa. "Have you thought about how you'll redecorate the staff room? I have some ideas." Something inside me snapped. Years of suppressed hurt crystallized into clarity. "Do you even care?" I asked, my voice unnaturally calm. "Do you ever care about anything that happens in my life?" Mom looked startled. "Of course I care, Olivia. Don't be dramatic." "I'm not being dramatic. I just landed the biggest project of my career, and you dismissed it in 5 seconds to go back to discussing Vanessa's minimum wage promotion." Vanessa's face flushed. "Excuse me? Just because you're jealous of my success doesn't mean you get to minimize it." "Jealous?" I laughed, without humor. "Vanessa, I just landed a contract worth more than you'll make in 3 years at that boutique. I'm not jealous. I'm tired. Tired of being treated like I don't matter in this family." "Here we go again," Mom sighed theatrically. "Always making everything about you, Olivia." "When is anything ever about me?" I countered, years of examples flooding my mind. "The pearls you promised me that you gave to Vanessa? The emergency surgery you skipped for her dance recital? The money I loaned you for her car that was apparently a gift?" Robert shifted uncomfortably but remained silent as always. Mom's expression hardened. "You've always been so needy, Olivia. Vanessa understands that family means supporting each other without keeping score." The hypocrisy was breathtaking. Supporting each other? When have you ever supported me? Name one time you've put me first. Mom couldn't answer. Instead, she deflected. "I don't have to justify my parenting to you. This ungrateful attitude is exactly why." "Why what, Mom? Why you've always preferred Vanessa? Just admit it." The room temperature seemed to drop 10 degrees. Vanessa stood up, her chair scraping loudly across the hardwood floor. "This is pathetic. You're 28 years old and still whining that Mommy doesn't love you enough?" Her voice rose to a shriek. "Why don't you just disappear? Nobody wants to deal with your victim complex anymore." I turned to Mom, waiting for her to defend me, to object to Vanessa's cruelty. Instead, she crossed her arms and smirked. Actually, smirked, as if Vanessa had finally said what Mom had been thinking all along. The expression confirmed every suspicion, every fear I'd ever had about my place in this family. Robert stared at his plate, a passive witness to my humiliation. In that moment, everything crystallized with perfect clarity. This wasn't a family. It was a battlefield where I would always be the casualty. Without another word, I stood up, gathered my purse and jacket, and walked out. Nobody called after me, nobody followed. As I started my car, I caught a glimpse of them through the dining room window, already resuming their meal, my empty chair a visual testament to my irrelevance in their lives. I drove away from that house knowing something fundamental had changed. I wasn't just leaving a dinner. I was leaving behind the illusion that things might someday be different. The drive home from that dinner remains a blur in my memory, streetlights smearing through tears I couldn't control. I remember gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white, as if it was the only solid thing in a world suddenly untethered. My apartment felt both like a sanctuary and a prison when I finally arrived, safe from their cruelty but confining in its reminder of the life I'd built while constantly seeking approval I'd never receive. The first thing I did was call Maya. Despite the late hour, she answered immediately. "They're never going to change, are they?" I asked before she could even say hello. Maya listened as I poured out every detail of the dinner, the final smirk that had broken something permanent inside me. "Oh, Liv," she said finally. "I think you've known the answer to that question for a long time." She was right. The revelation wasn't that my mother preferred Vanessa, I'd known that for years, but that I had been clinging to a fantasy that someday she would see me, really see me, and love me the way I deserved. That fantasy had cost me years of pain, and I was finally ready to surrender it. "I need to get away," I said, surprising myself with the certainty in my voice. "Not just for a weekend. I need real distance." Maya didn't hesitate. "My family's cabin in Vermont. It's empty until summer. It's yours as long as you need it." By dawn, I had hatched a plan that felt both impulsive and inevitable. My freelance design business could operate from anywhere with decent internet. I had no pets, no plants, no obligations tying me to the city. I could, as Vanessa had so cruelly suggested, disappear. Over the next 48 hours, I moved with uncharacteristic decisiveness, arranging for a subletter for my apartment, packing my car with essentials, setting up mail forwarding, and emailing clients about my strategic work retreat. I told no one in my family where I was going. My phone began lighting up with texts and calls from Mom around the second day after the dinner, not apologizing, but performing concern and indignation in equal measure. "You're being childish walking out like that," one message read. "We need to talk about your behavior," demanded another. There was not a single "I'm sorry" or acknowledgement of how I'd been treated. Robert sent one message. "Your mother's upset. I know things got out of hand. Please call her." No mention of his own failure to intervene, no recognition of my pain. Vanessa, predictably, sent nothing. The 6-hour drive to Vermont felt like crossing a border into a new country, one where I wasn't defined by my mother's perception or my stepsister's cruelty. Maya's family cabin sat on 3 acres of woodland outside a small town. It was rustic but comfortable, with a wood stove, reliable internet, and absolute privacy. That first night, sitting on the porch watching stars emerge in a sky unmarred. By city lights, I felt something unfamiliar. Peace. It was like removing shoes that had been too tight for years. You forget the constant pain until it suddenly stops. The texts from Mom continued, evolving from irritation to performative worry. "We're concerned about you, and if you're trying to punish me, it's working." I responded minimally, only enough to confirm I was safe but unavailable for further discussion. After the first week, I established a rhythm. Mornings spent working on the Nexus Tech project, afternoons hiking in the surrounding woods or exploring the small town nearby. I found a therapist who conducted sessions via video call, committing to twice-weekly appointments to process the decades of emotional neglect. "Think of this time as an emotional detox," Dr. Patterson suggested. "You've been swimming in toxic water so long you've forgotten what clean water feels like." I began journaling extensively, excavating memories I'd suppressed or minimized, birthdays forgotten, achievements ignored, the constant subtle messaging that Vanessa mattered, and I didn't. Some days I wrote until my hand cramped, tears staining the pages. Other days I felt nothing at all, a numbness that Dr. Patterson assured me was part of the healing process. Slowly, I rediscovered parts of myself that had been buried under the weight of seeking maternal approval. I resumed sketching for pleasure, not just professional projects. I unearthed my love for baking, filling the cabin with the scent of bread and cookies. I started running on the wooded trails, my body growing stronger as my mind gradually cleared. In the small-town library, I encountered Grace, an 84-year-old former English professor who invited me to join her weekly coffee gathering. "You remind me of myself at your age," she told me one afternoon, "running away to find yourself." When I explained I wasn't running away but disappearing, she laughed softly. "My dear, you're not disappearing. You're finally becoming visible to yourself." Her words resonated deeply. The Nexus Tech project flourished in my isolation, my creativity flowing more freely without the constant drain of family drama. I expanded my portfolio, landed 2 additional clients, and doubled my rates, steps I'd been too insecure to take before. After 1 month of minimal communication, Mom's messages grew increasingly desperate and manipulative. "How could you do this to me?" And, "After everything I've sacrificed for you." For the first time, I didn't feel guilt or the compulsion to comfort her. Instead, I drafted a lengthy email setting boundaries for any future relationship, making clear that I would no longer accept being treated as less valuable than Vanessa. After 6 weeks in Vermont, Dad drove up from Boston to check on me. We spent a weekend hiking, cooking, and having the honest conversations we'd avoided for years. "I failed you," he admitted as we sat by the wood stove. "I saw what was happening with your mother and Vanessa, but I thought stepping back was better than fighting and making things worse." I was wrong. His acknowledgement of his role in my pain allowed something to heal between us. As spring melted into early summer, I realized I no longer felt the raw wound that had driven me to Vermont. Instead, I had a clear vision of the kind of life I wanted, one built on genuine connections rather than the endless pursuit of validation from people incapable of providing it. It wasn't forgiveness exactly, but a determination not to let their limitations determine my future. I was ready to return to the city, not as the same person who had fled in pain, but as someone who had found her strength in disappearing. Vermont's springtime transformation mirrored my own internal metamorphosis. As dormant trees burst into vibrant green and wildflowers reclaimed meadows, I experienced my own reawakening, painful at times, but undeniably real. My twice-weekly therapy sessions with Dr. Patterson became the scaffolding around which I built a new understanding of myself and my family dynamics. "Your mother's inability to love you properly isn't a reflection of your worthiness," she emphasized repeatedly. "It's a reflection of her limitations." This concept, that the deficit was in my mother, not in me, required constant reinforcement to counteract decades of internalized messaging. Journaling became both ritual and exorcism. Each morning before work, I filled pages with memories, reflections, and gradually hopes for the future. The early entries were dominated by pain and anger, detailed accounts of holiday disasters, Vanessa's cruelties, Mom's indifference, Robert's complicity. "Why wasn't I enough?" I wrote repeatedly, the question staining the pages like a persistent bruise. Gradually, the tone of the entries shifted. "What if this isn't about being enough?" I wrote one morning in a breakthrough moment. "What if Mom simply doesn't have the capacity to love 2 daughters equally? What if her limitations aren't my failure?" The Vermont woods became my sanctuary. Each afternoon, I explored different trails, first tentatively, then with growing confidence. I learned to identify birdsong, track animal prints, navigate using natural landmarks rather than my phone. The physical exertion helped process emotional upheaval, sweat carrying away, toxins both literal and metaphorical. I remembered loving art as a teenager, before college applications and career concerns transformed creativity into a commodity. In Vermont, I rediscovered drawing without purpose or judgment. I bought inexpensive watercolors and filled sketchbooks with impressions of the landscape, imperfect, expressive, done purely for joy rather than approval. The lack of witnesses to my healing proved crucial. Without Mom's dismissive glances or Vanessa's competitive commentary, I could embrace my strengths and acknowledge my weaknesses without shame. I could laugh too loudly, cry openly, dance awkwardly, to music in the cabin without fearing judgment or comparison. The Nexus Tech project became a testament to my professional capabilities. Working from the cabin, without the emotional drain of family dynamics, my creativity flourished. the client, called my concepts revolutionary and exactly what we've been searching for. Each success reinforced what Maya and my therapist had been telling me. I was talented, valuable, and worthy, regardless of my mother's inability to see it. The small Vermont town offered unexpected community. Besides Grace, the former professor, who'd become something of a mentor, I met Sarah at the local bookstore, Greg at the farmer's market, and the Hendersons at the diner where I sometimes worked remotely. These relationships developed organically, without the burden of history or expectation. "You're quite a mystery," Grace commented during one of our coffee meetings. "Everyone's curious about the city girl hiding out in the Andrews cabin." When I explained I wasn't hiding but healing, she nodded sagely. "Same thing sometimes." My mother's messages evolved from demanding to plaintive as weeks passed. "Please just tell me what I did wrong," she wrote, as if years of favoritism could be distilled into a single offense. Robert called once, sounding uncomfortable and out of his depth. "Your mother isn't sleeping. Can't you just come home and work this out?" I maintained firm boundaries, repeating that I was safe but needed space. Dr. Patterson helped craft responses that were clear but not cruel. "You're breaking the pattern of placating and people-pleasing," she noted with approval. "That's tremendously difficult work." Dad's visit marked a turning point in our relationship. Walking through pine forests and along babbling streams, we had conversations we should have had years earlier. "I thought providing financially was enough," he admitted. "I didn't understand that my absence left you vulnerable." He didn't offer excuses, just acknowledgement and genuine regret. For the first time, I saw him not as the father who had abandoned me, but as a flawed human who had made mistakes he now recognized. We talked about Vanessa, about Mom's favoritism, about his new life in Colorado with his second wife. "Distance gives perspective," he said, gesturing to the mountains visible through the trees. "You've found that here. I found it in Colorado. Sometimes stepping back is the only way to see clearly." After he left, I felt a lightness that signaled another piece of healing falling into place. By the 6th week, I received an unexpected email from an art director I'd worked with years earlier. A major publishing house needed a creative lead for a prestigious project. Would I be interested? The offer represented not just financial stability, but creative recognition at the highest level. Negotiating the contract from my cabin porch, watching sunset paint the mountains gold, I realized I had built success and security entirely on my own merit. The persistent internal voice questioning my worth had finally been silenced. In therapy, we began discussing my eventual return to the city. "What boundaries will you need?" Dr. Patterson asked. "What relationship with your mother and stepsister is actually healthy for you?" These were complex questions requiring deep reflection. I realized I didn't want to cut them off entirely. That felt like allowing their dysfunction to define my choices. Instead, I wanted limited, controlled contact with clear boundaries and consequences. I drafted a detailed email to my mother, outlining my terms for resuming contact: acknowledgement of past favoritism, no more triangulation with Vanessa, respect for my separate relationship with Dad, and family gatherings limited to major holidays with advanced planning. I didn't send it immediately, letting it sit as I considered each point carefully. The 2-month mark approached with Vermont sliding fully into summer. Wildflowers carpeted meadows, thunderstorms rolled dramatically across mountain vistas, and tourist traffic increased in the small town. I felt stronger physically and emotionally than I had in years. My work was thriving. I had established meaningful connections, and most importantly, I had broken free from the desperate cycle of seeking validation from someone incapable of providing it. One evening, sitting on the cabin porch watching fireflies emerge at dusk, I realized I was ready to return to my real life. Not as an escape from Vermont, but as a continuation of the strength I'd found there. The next morning, I sent the boundary email to my mother and began packing. It was time to stop disappearing and start appearing fully as myself. The drive back to the city felt surreal. After 2 months cocooned in Vermont's tranquility, the increasing traffic and noise as I approached metropolitan life created a sensory overload that mirrored my emotional state. I had arranged to meet Mom at a neutral coffee shop downtown, public enough to discourage dramatic scenes but quiet enough for honest conversation. I arrived early, selecting a corner table and ordering a chamomile tea that I hoped might calm my jittery nerves. The woman who entered 15 minutes later looked smaller somehow, less formidable than the mother who had loomed so large in my psyche. Mom had always been meticulous about her appearance, but now I noticed missed highlights in her hair, a slightly rumpled blouse. Small details that suggested my disappearance had affected her more than her messages indicated. "Olivia," she said, voice catching slightly as she slid into the seat across from me. Her eyes darted across my face as if cataloging changes. "You look different." I nodded, not filling the silence with reassurances or explanations as I would have before. Dr. Patterson had coached me through this meeting extensively. Stay centered, speak your truth without expectation, set boundaries without justification. Mom's discomfort with my silence manifested in nervous chatter about the drive, the weather, the coffee shop decor, anything but the reason we were meeting. When she finally exhausted small talk, she leaned forward with a practiced expression of concern. "Everyone's been so worried about you, disappearing like that. Vanessa thought you might have had some kind of breakdown." The immediate mention of Vanessa and the subtle implication that my actions stemmed from mental instability rather than legitimate grievances confirmed that the Vermont interlude hadn't magically transformed our dynamic. "I didn't have a breakdown," I replied evenly. "I needed space to process years of being treated as less important than Vanessa and our family. The dinner where you smirked when she told me to disappear was simply the final confirmation of what I've always known." Mom's face flushed. "You've always twisted things to make yourself the victim. I never favored Vanessa. She just needed more support because she didn't have the advantages you did." I took a slow breath, centering myself. "I'd like to share some specific examples if you're willing to listen." Without waiting for permission, I calmly recounted the incidents that had cut deepest. Grandma's pearls, the hospital no-show, the loan for Vanessa's car, the countless achievements ignored, while Vanessa's minor accomplishments were celebrated. With each example, Mom's defensive posture gradually softened, her rebuttals becoming less certain. "I was trying to help Vanessa feel welcome," she started, then faltered. "The pearls were just, I thought." For perhaps the first time, she seemed unable to construct a narrative that justified her actions. When I finished, the silence between us felt charged with decades of unspoken truths. "Did you ever stop to consider how it felt to be me?" I asked quietly. "To watch my mother consistently choose someone else? To never be enough?" Mom's eyes filled with tears, not the manipulative kind I'd seen before, but something rawer, more genuine. "It wasn't about you not being enough," she whispered, the admission seeming to surprise even her. "After the divorce, you reminded me so much of your father. Same expressions, same laugh. It hurt to look at you sometimes." The revelation landed like a physical blow. All these years of feeling inadequate, and the real issue had been something entirely beyond my control. Genetic echoes of my father that my mother couldn't bear to witness after he left. "So you punished me for looking like Dad? For being half him?" The unfairness of it burned. Mom flinched. "I didn't think of it as punishment. I just gravitated toward Vanessa because she was simpler. She didn't remind me of my failures." Before I could respond, the coffee shop door chimed, and Vanessa herself appeared, scanning the room before spotting us. My stomach dropped. This was supposed to be a private conversation. Seeing her stride purposefully toward our table confirmed my suspicion that this accidental encounter had been orchestrated. "You couldn't even respect my request for a one-on-one conversation," I said to Mom, disappointment but not surprise coloring my voice. Vanessa arrived at our table, her expression a practiced blend of concern and irritation. "Finally decided to stop your little vacation and deal with the mess you've created?" she asked, pulling out a chair without invitation. "Mom's been a wreck, because of your dramatics." The old Olivia would have apologized, would have shrunk to accommodate Vanessa's narrative. Vermont Olivia straightened her spine. "This is a private conversation that you weren't invited to, Vanessa. I love you as my stepsister, but our relationship needs significant boundaries going forward." Vanessa's mouth opened in shock. I had never spoken to her so directly before. "You don't get to dictate terms to this family after abandoning us," she sputtered. "I'm your stepsister. I deserve—" You deserve respect as a person, I interrupted calmly. But you don't deserve to interrupt my conversation with my mother or to comment on choices I made for my own well-being. If you'd like to have a separate conversation about our relationship another day, I'm open to that. Today isn't that day. Mom stared at me with an unreadable expression while Vanessa cycled through shock, anger, and finally, grudging reassessment. The dynamic had shifted tangibly, my newfound clarity creating boundaries that neither woman quite knew how to cross. After a tense moment, Vanessa stood. Whatever. Call me when you're done with this, she told Mom before stalking out. When the door closed behind her, Mom exhaled shakily. You've never spoken to her like that before. I've never been clear about my own worth before, I responded simply. The remainder of our conversation held no dramatic revelations or tearful reconciliations, but something fundamental had changed. Mom listened more than she defended. I spoke truth without seeking approval. We established tentative parameters for moving forward, monthly dinners initially, without Vanessa present, with the explicit understanding that any regression to old patterns would result in me leaving immediately. I can't promise I'll never hurt you again, Mom said as we prepared to leave. But I can promise I'll try to see you, really see you, from now on. It wasn't everything, but it was a start. 2 days later, I met with Robert at the same coffee shop. His discomfort was palpable, eyes darting around as if seeking escape routes. I should have said something, he admitted without prompting. All those times Vanessa was cruel or your mother was dismissive. I told myself it wasn't my place to interfere. Your silence was interference, I replied, not unkindly but without cushioning the truth. Every time you watched and did nothing, you were choosing a side. He nodded, accepting the assessment with surprising grace. How do we move forward? He asked simply. I outlined similar boundaries to those I'd established with Mom. Limited contact, explicit expectations, immediate consequences for returning to old patterns. That weekend, I signed a lease on a new apartment across town, still in the city but far enough from Mom and Vanessa to require deliberate effort for visits. The physical distance mirrored the emotional boundaries I'd established. The first family gathering under the new parameters occurred 3 months later, Thanksgiving dinner at their house with rules established in advance. The atmosphere was initially strained, conversations stilted. Vanessa tested boundaries repeatedly, with cutting remarks disguised as jokes or attempts to monopolize attention. Each time I responded calmly but firmly, naming the behavior without emotion. That comment was dismissive, Vanessa, or I was speaking and I'd appreciate not being interrupted. Mom watched these interactions with a complex expression, part admiration, part discomfort at the new dynamic. By dessert, a subtle shift had occurred. Vanessa's attempts at dominance had largely ceased in the face of consistent, calm response. Mom had made visible efforts to engage equally with both of us. Robert had actually intervened once when Vanessa attempted to belittle my recent professional achievements. It wasn't perfect. Decades of dysfunction couldn't be resolved in a single dinner. But it was movement in the right direction. As I drove home that night, I realized something profound had changed. For the first time, I had participated in a family gathering as my authentic self, not desperately seeking approval or bracing for pain, but simply present as the person I had become. Vermont hadn't just been an escape, it had been a transformation. I hadn't just disappeared, I had reemerged. 1 year after walking out of that fateful dinner, my life has transformed in ways I couldn't have imagined. The Nexus Tech project launched to industry acclaim, establishing my design studio as a boutique powerhouse for brand transformations. What began as a one-woman operation now includes 2 junior designers and a project manager, with a waitlist of clients eager for our signature approach. The financial security I've built feels particularly sweet given how I once struggled while watching Vanessa receive support I was denied. Professional success is gratifying, but the personal growth feels more significant. Through continued therapy and deliberate practice, I've developed an internal compass that no longer depends on external validation, particularly from my mother. The desperate need for her approval that once drove my every decision has faded, replaced by a quiet confidence in my own worth. My relationship with Luke, a children's book illustrator I met through a client project, marks my first truly healthy romantic partnership. Unlike previous relationships where I accepted emotional crumbs and overextended myself to prove my worth, With Luke there exists a natural reciprocity and respect. When he asked why I was smiling during an ordinary moment of chopping vegetables, together, I realized it was because I felt secure, not waiting for the other shoe to drop or analyzing his expressions for signs of disappointment. "You know exactly who you are," he told me recently. "It's beautiful to witness." The relationship with my mother has evolved into something I'd describe as guardedly positive. Our monthly dinners continue, each one a careful dance of new patterns, overtaking old habits. Sometimes she slips, making an offhand comparison to Vanessa or dismissing an achievement of mine. But unlike before, I calmly name the behavior without anger or defensiveness. Most surprisingly, she listens. "I never realized how often I did that," she admitted after one such conversation. "It became so automatic I didn't even hear myself anymore." There are moments of genuine connection too. Her excitement about my business expansion, her questions about my design process that reflect actual interest rather than perfunctory attention. Last month, she asked if I would help her redecorate her home office, valuing my professional expertise in a way she never had before. Vanessa and I maintain limited contact, primarily at family gatherings that I now attend selectively rather than out of obligation. Her initial resistance to our new dynamic has gradually transformed into something resembling respect, if not warmth. The performative competition has largely ceased, perhaps because I no longer engage with it. At Christmas, she awkwardly complimented my business success, adding, "I guess we took different paths, but ended up okay." It wasn't an apology for years of cruelty, but it acknowledged my validity in a way she never had before. Robert has made more effort to connect one-on-one, suggesting occasional lunches where we discuss everything from his woodworking hobby to my business challenges. "I always saw your potential," he told me during one such meeting. "I just didn't know how to support it against your mother's patterns." I accepted this with the complicated truth it contained, his recognition coupled with his past inaction. My relationship with Dad has deepened significantly. Our monthly video calls have become meaningful connections rather than obligatory check-ins. He visited 3 times this year, each visit more comfortable than the last. During his most recent stay, he brought a box of my childhood mementos he'd saved after the divorce. Art projects, school awards, birthday cards I'd made him. "I always saw you," he said as we sorted through these artifacts together, "even when I wasn't there as much as I should have been." Perhaps the most meaningful growth has come through the therapy group I joined for adult children of emotionally neglectful parents. Hearing others articulate experiences so similar to mine diminished the isolation that had once felt crushing. Within this community, I found not only support, but the opportunity to offer guidance to those earlier in their healing journey. Amanda, a younger member struggling with similar maternal dynamics, reached out for coffee outside the group sessions. "How did you stop needing your mother's approval?" she asked, the question cutting straight to the heart of the matter. I shared my experience without pretending to have perfect answers, emphasizing that healing isn't linear. Our monthly mentorship meetings have become meaningful anchors in both our lives. The wisdom I've gained feels hard-won but precious. I've learned that forgiveness doesn't require forgetting or excusing harmful behavior. Rather, it's a release of the expectation that the past could have been different. My mother couldn't give what she didn't have, wounded as she was by her own unresolved pain. This understanding doesn't erase the damage done, but it allows me to interact with her as she is, not as I wished she would be. I've discovered that family is both less and more than blood. Less deterministic of our worth and identity, more expansive in its potential configurations. The chosen family I've built through friendships and intentional connections provides the unconditional support I once thought could only come from biological ties. Most profoundly, I've realized that disappearing wasn't an act of defeat or escape, but the most powerful statement I could make about my own value. By removing myself from a situation where I was chronically undervalued, I created space to recognize my own worth independent of others' perceptions. What initially felt like running away proved to be running toward my authentic self. As I sit in my sun-filled studio overlooking the city, I feel a peace that once seemed impossible. The journey from that devastating dinner to this moment wasn't linear or simple, but each step led me closer to wholeness. The words, "Why don't you just disappear?" once cut like a knife, but now I recognize them as the unintentional catalyst for my transformation. Sometimes the cruelest question contains the seed of exactly what we need to hear. Have you ever had to walk away from a relationship, family, friend, or romantic to find yourself? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments below. Remember that choosing yourself isn't selfish. It's often the most courageous act of self-love. If this story resonated with you, please like, subscribe, and share it with someone who might need to hear that sometimes. Disappearing from toxic situations is the first step to reappearing as your true self. Thank you for witnessing my journey, and I wish you the clarity and courage to honor your own worth, whatever that may require.